The president of Belarus has discussed holding fresh elections eventually as pressure mounts on the country's leadership. These are some pictures of protests from Minsk earlier today. The protest began more than a week ago, of course, over claims the election had been rigged and have gathered pace despite mass arrests. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled the country since 1994 and, according to the official result, won the presidential election with 80% of the vote. Until now, he's held firm on the poll, even earlier today telling factory workers, "We held the election. Until you kill me, there will be no other election." But he was jeered and heckled. Here's what happened.
Я сказал все, можете кричать, уходи.
Well, here's more from the BBC's Sarah Rainsford in Moscow.
I think those scenes of basically public humiliation are very difficult for any politician in any normal country to survive. Of course, Belarus politically is an authoritarian state, and so it is not normal in that sense. Perhaps Mr. Lukashenko can find some way to cling on, and it was interesting that as those jeers and the heckling was coming from the crowd, he stood there firmly. He responded. He came back at the crowd. You know, it was quite fascinating psychological study of a man who must never have encountered this before in his 26 years of the presidency. But certainly, you know, with every passing day, the number of groups, the companies, the different sectors of society who are now coming out and openly voicing their criticism of Alexander Lukashenko, their calls for him to go and their support for new elections, that crowd, that momentum is building all the time, and it is very difficult to see that tide turning now.
Well, workers at state-run factories walked off the job last week, and the strikes have continued. Take a look at this. This is what was broadcast on a state TV breakfast show after several presenters and staff resigned. As you can see, the sofas are empty and there's music playing in the background. Here's what one cooking show presenter said about resigning, as she's already had to flee to Ukraine.
They tried to frighten people, but people got angry instead. And now it's impossible to stop things. No one will ever forget what they did. It's a point of no return. They will never forgive this.
And the main opposition candidate in the elections, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who also fled the country last week, released this video.
I'm prepared to take responsibility and act as the nation's leader during this period, so the country can settle down and get back to normality, so that we can release all political prisoners and prepare a legal framework and conditions to hold a new round of presidential elections quickly. Genuine, fair and transparent elections that will be accepted without question by the international community.
Well, despite those calls, it's not yet clear what will happen next. Mr. Lukashenko says there will have to be a referendum on constitutional changes before there could be a new presidential poll. Here's how one protester reacted to that news.
Actually, I don't believe it. He has previously said many times he won't let go of his power, and I think this is just I don't know, like a diversion tactic to gain time, because this is going to be like more, he will have more time organizing the referendum, so maybe more people will be arrested, detained, beaten up, and maybe more people decide to stay inside and not to go out and protest.
Well, EU leaders will be holding an emergency video summit on Wednesday after ministers agreed to place more sanctions on Belarus last week. Here's the chairman of the Polish Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee.
The real problem right now is that Mr. Lukashenko is ready to discuss the future of his country with Mr. Putin. And he has done it twice in the last 2 days. But as long as we don't see any sign of his willingness to find a common ground with protesters, in fact, with the emerging civil society in Belarus, we have every reason to be pessimistic.
So what's not yet clear is how Russia will react to the events in Belarus. And remember, Russia has previously intervened militarily in the region. The Russian President Vladimir Putin and Mr. Lukashenko spoke over the phone on Sunday. And here's the statement issued by the Kremlin. It says, the Russian side reaffirmed its readiness to render the necessary assistance to resolve the challenges facing Belarus based on the principles of the Treaty on the Creation of a Union State. Well, here's James Nixie, the director of the think tank Chatham House's Russia, Eurasia and Europe programmes.
The least likely option here is that Russia will do nothing. The slightly less likely, but still a possibility, is that Russia will intervene with muscularity militarily, as it did in Ukraine and in Georgia in 2008 and 2014. I think more likely is that although Lukashenko, as you inferred, is not a particularly popular person in the Kremlin, he is nonetheless he is still an ally. He is anti-Western. That counts a lot for Vladimir Putin. So it's most likely that Russia will try to intervene in these more underhand ways, so-called hybrid warfare, whereby they try to undermine the opposition, or maybe they try to get their way with the new people in power, in fact.
Well, I spoke to BBC Russian's Yuri Vendik about what might happen next.
I hear all sorts of various comments and forecasts as to what Russia might do, and one of them you've just heard. Well, some people, yes, they do argue, some hope, some fear that Russia might help Lukashenko to stay in power, even by physically intervening into Belarus, even by helping by police or even military force. But then many people argue that that would be extremely unwise of Putin to intervene physically for many reasons. One of them is that whoever succeeds Lukashenko, if he's overthrown, of course, that person by no means will be anti-Russian or pro-European for that matter, because none of the candidates, none of the leading politicians of the opposition, if there is any organized opposition, has made any anti-Russian statements or gestures, because the two countries and the two people are as close as it gets. And as I say, whoever succeeds Lukashenko, he will be pro-Russian. And Belarus, of course, depends on the Belarusian economy, of course, depends very much on the Russian. But on the third hand, many, especially members of the Russian opposition, they fear that even it would be unwise. The Putin, in principle, doesn't want any new color revolutions on his borders, and that's why he will be rather unrationally intervene into Belarusian affairs.